Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us for our first security reporting webinar. This is a standard disclaimer for FTA policy, which in summary is stating that the material covered in the document is intended only to provide clarity to the public regarding existing requirements under the law or agency policies. The goal of today's session is to familiarize NTD reporters with reporting security events. The webinar will focus on requirements and applicability rather than completing the forms. For those of you that report for purchase transportation providers, also known in the system as PT operations, please share this presentation with them so that they're aware of what you are required to report to NTD. This presentation would also be helpful for those that provide data to you from perhaps other departments, so again, that they are familiar with your reporting requirements. So today we'll cover in depth the definitions and requirements for submitting reportable major security events to NTD. Major security events fall into two categories: personal security and system security events. We will also be discussing reporting non-major assaults on transit workers. Additionally, we've included 5 frequently asked questions from reporters and their solutions. Finally, the last few slides will provide some additional reporting resources, including for assaults on transit workers and a current FRN that's in progress and in review and comment period. Excuse me. So I'll be starting off today, as you can see, but we also have 2 other hosts on board from the safety validation team. They are James Beek and Grace Walton. Other key contacts for questions are Chelsea Champlin, the NTD program manager, and Joe Eldridge, the NTD operations center manager. We will present this contact data again at the end of the session. Before we get started, when posting your questions, as Lori mentioned, please use the Q&A box and, if possible, enter a slide number you may have jotted down in case we need to jump back to that slide, in a timely fashion. So first, we're going to have a very brief overview of the NTD reporting program itself and consequences for failing to report. In 1974, Congress established the National Transit Database Program as a means to collect information and statistics on transit systems in the United States. The first data was collected in 1979 via paper reports. Since then, the NTD has evolved into the nation's primary source for information and statistics on transit systems. The data you report is used in a variety of ways. Those include, but are not limited to, publicly available data products, which can be used for peer review, the formulation of national policy, and is used to factor federal funding allocations to transit agencies. Failure to report required data can have more severe consequences and could affect the agency's annual program funding from FTA. A failure to report can be submitted by an analyst to FTA for a variety of reasons that you see listed here. Please make every effort to report events by the due date and respond to your analyst's inquiries, perhaps with various analyses that we do, as quickly as possible or by the provided due date, if included, to avoid undesirable consequences. So at this point, I'm going to hand you over to James to start covering our major events, and then we'll be back in later on in the program. James?
Thank you, Ann. Before we dive in, we'd like to point out that the most important part of an SNS 40 major event report is the event description. Event description should be clear and concise. This is how you relate to the validation analyst what happened, when it happened, why it happened, and where it happened. It should also include how many injuries and/or fatalities and who the people were. Basically, your narrative should corroborate the data selections you have chosen in the report. The description does not need to be long, only thorough. Providing multiple accounts can be confusing, so please include only one account or a final determination of what occurred. As a reminder, SNS 40 reports are due no later than 30 days from the date of the event. A reportable event is a security event occurring on transit right-of-way or infrastructure, at a transit revenue facility, at a maintenance facility or yard, during a transit-related maintenance activity, or involving a transit revenue vehicle that meets the reporting threshold. Infrastructure is the underlying framework or structures that support a public transportation system. There are some exclusions to the applicability, such as events that occur off transit property where persons, vehicles, or objects come to or come to rest on transit property after the event. Death from illness, drug overdose, or natural causes, including those found deceased. Other events such as assault, robberies, etc., occurring at bus stops or shelters that are not on transit-owned property, unless it involves a person boarding or alighting or involving a transit revenue vehicle. Now that we know what a reportable event is, let's look at the list of thresholds for reporting security events. This is not all thresholds for event reporting. Instead, we will focus only on thresholds that apply to security events. This is only a list. We will cover each threshold in more detail as we move through the webinar. First, a fatality confirmed within 30 days of the date of the transit-related event. Then injuries. There are two types of injuries. The injury threshold is any person immediately transported for medical attention away from the scene of the event. This threshold is applicable for all modes. In addition, for rail modes only, is any injury meeting the serious injury criteria. The next threshold is evacuations. There are two types of evacuations. An evacuation of transit property for life safety reasons, which is applicable to all modes. Also, for rail modes only, we collect evacuations of transit property to the rail right-of-way. The property damage thresholds are different for non-rail and rail modes. For non-rail modes, the damage to any and all transit or non-transit property involved must total $25,000 or more. For rail modes, the damage must meet the criteria for substantial damage. We are providing a few examples here. First is an example of a reportable event that may seem unusual, but we have collected a number of reports in this type of situation. So in this example, the inspector was assaulted but declined medical attention, therefore not injured. However, an involved female was injured. This would be reported as an assault on a transit worker, and one would include the injured party. Though not shown here, another example may be a police officer is assaulted, but the actor is the one transported. There again, this would be an assault on a worker, with the actor reported as the injury. The event description must be very clear to describe who was assaulted and who was injured. Next is an example of an event that is not reportable, where a person is waiting at a bus stop on a city street and is assaulted or robbed. This is not reportable because the bus stop is not on transit property and the person was not boarding or alighting at the time. However, if the person was boarding or alighting at the time, or the event delayed the bus from continuing service, then it would be reportable as it involves a transit vehicle and an injury. Let's look at each reportable threshold in more detail. Fatalities. A fatality is a death confirmed within 30 days of a transit-related event. This includes transit-related suicides. This also includes deaths of undetermined cause found on the right-of-way. Please do not include deaths resulting from illness, drug overdoses, exposure to the elements, or due to natural causes. With the exception for the deaths on the right-of-way that we just mentioned, in general, people found deceased on transit property are not reportable when the death is not a result of a collision, electrocution, suicide, homicide, and so on, such as a person found deceased on a bench in a transit station. The injury threshold. An injured person is a person transported immediately away from scene for medical attention. This includes transport by ambulance, private vehicle, or any other means. This applies to all non-rail modes and rail modes. There are a number of exclusions to consider, such as a person walking away from the scene for medical attention, which is not considered injured. Medical attention must be sought without delay after an event. Medical attention must be administered at a location other than where the event occurred, meaning that minor first aid given at the scene is not considered an injury. Continuing with exclusions. Medical attention due to illnesses should not be reported. For example, a passenger on a bus has a seizure and is transported to the hospital. There are also exclusions for mental health evaluations, declarations of self-harm with no reportable event occurring, and transport solely for intoxication, overdoses, or exposure to the elements. Serious injuries are defined by the following criteria. Requires hospitalization for more than 48 hours, commencing within 7 days of the event date. Results in a fracture of any bone, except simple fractures of fingers, toes, or nose. Causes severe hemorrhages, nerve, muscle, or tendon damage. Involves an internal organ, or involves second or third degree burns, or any burns affecting more than 5% of the body. Agencies may be able to view video surveillance to make this determination. We get many questions on how an agency is to find out about hospitalization or injury severity with current HIPAA regulations. Sometimes the agency will learn from the injured party or from a person's family. If not, FTA expects only a reasonable effort to attain this information. Agencies may be able to view video surveillance or use eyewitness accounts to attest to the severity of the injury. The serious injury threshold applies only to rail modes. An injury may be deemed as a serious injury, and serious injuries do not require transport from the scene. This may seem odd, but we have received reports where the person did not know how badly injured they were until later. When you report a serious injury, please describe the nature of the injury in the event description to corroborate the serious injury selection. If this data is not provided, the report will be returned for the missing information. If a person is knocked unconscious, this would meet the serious threshold as that affects an internal organ. Please note that a 48-hour hold solely for a mental health evaluation does not meet hospitalization portion of the serious injury criteria. Evacuations for life safety reasons are reportable, and this applies to both rail and non-rail modes. Life safety means there's imminent danger to all people in that environment. Rail mode reporters have an additional evacuation threshold for situations where passengers or patrons are evacuated onto the right-of-way, which means the tracks and track area. While self-evacuations are not a threshold, the evacuation form collects self-evacuation facts. However, the evacuation must meet one or both of the two criteria, life safety component or to the right-of-way. Self-evacuation means that the customers vacate the property without direction of the or other authority. If the self-evacuation was not for life safety or to the right-of-way, it is not reportable. For example, If a person jumps out of a window at a platform because they missed a stop, the event would not be reportable as it meets neither criteria. Some examples of a life safety reason are suspicious packages, bomb threats, active shooters, or a person with a weapon on a transit vehicle. The property damage thresholds. For non-rail modes, the total actual or estimated property damage incurred in the event must be greater than or equal to $25,000. Property damage includes damage to any transit property, including but not limited to stations, transit vehicles, equipment, etc., and any non-transit property involved in the event. For example, if a bus and a maintenance facility was vandalized and the actor also vandalized 3 employees' private vehicles, the damage to all vehicles would be added together to determine if the damage reached the $25,000 threshold. Estimated property damage excludes personal property such as laptops, cell phones, investigation costs, medical claims, or litigation. NTD requires only general or ballpark estimates, and you may use a variety of methods for estimating the costs. For example, the agency may use Blue Book values for vehicles, or may use the cost to repair or replace the item, or insurance estimates. The agency may also establish standardized property damage estimates for specific levels of damage. For example, an agency may set a smashed window and a headlight damage at $500. I'm not proposing $500. This is just an example. There is generally not an active market for public transit buses. For damage or total assets like transit buses, FTA accepts the depreciated value as the damage value. The example shows a 10-year-old bus with 2 years left on its useful life. So the equation shows that you first subtract the age of the bus from the useful life of the bus, then divide that number by the life of the bus. The second line breaks down those results and then shows the resulting depreciated value of $60,000. Property damage for rail modes is substantial damage. Substantial damage criteria states that the event disrupts the operations of the rail transit agency. That's part 1. The second part of the criteria states that the damage affects the strength, performance, or operating characteristics of the vehicle, facilities, equipment, rolling stock, or infrastructure, such that it requires remedial actions such as towing, rescue, on-site maintenance, or immediate removal prior to safe operation. Both parts are considered to determine substantial damage. Determine if the remedial action is merely cautionary or required. Damage also includes towing costs and other costs to clear wreckage and debris. We will talk more about how to apply this criteria to specific event types as we move through the webinar. Please remember that for rail modes, dollar amounts are not a factor in determining substantial damage. To meet the substantial damage threshold, it must meet both parts of the criteria only. There are exclusions to the substantial damage criteria, though many of these would not be a factor for majority of security events. Basically, FTA excludes cracked windows, dents, broken lights, mirrors, minor repairs, maintenance costs, safety testing, or event recorder download fees. Also, personal property is excluded as well as the cost of accident or criminal investigation, medical claims, or litigation. Now that we have completed the applicability and the thresholds, we will move on to the different security events. There are 2 categories of security events. Personal security events affect individuals on transit property or those boarding or lighting a transit vehicle. System security events affect the transit system, whole or in part, rather than individuals. Personal security events. First, we will look at assaults. The assault term is unchanged from last year and is shown. One person attacking another without authority or permission. The term assault now applies only to non-worker assaults, such as passenger or patron assaults. As a reminder, any assault reported on the personal security form are those that do not involve contact with a transit vehicle. For example, if someone is pushed in front of a moving transit vehicle and makes contact with the transit vehicle, the event is reported as a collision and the reporter checks the assault checkbox on the injury form. The most common threshold for an assault on a transit worker has a different definition, which includes embedded thresholds to consider. An assault on a transit worker is a circumstance in which an individual knowingly, without lawful authority or permission, and with intent to endanger the safety of any individual, or with a reckless disregard for the safety of human life, interferes with, disables, or incapacitates a transit worker while the transit worker is performing the duties of the transit worker. The embedded thresholds of this term are shown here in bold. Once meeting these thresholds, the event must still meet at least one overarching reporting threshold, which we already discussed. Please notice that the last portion of the definition indicates the person must be on duty for the event to be reported as an assault on a transit worker. So what is a transit worker? Prior to April 2023, there was no formal definition of a transit worker, only transit employee. This new definition was made specifically to include transit volunteers. The existing definition of a transit employee includes that the person is compensated by the transit agency. If the worker is off duty at the time of the assault, this would be reported as an assault, and the off-duty person is reported as a patron or passenger. The agency is responsible for determining the presence of intent to endanger an individual or reckless disregard for safety. FDA may ask for details about how your agency assessed the thresholds to confirm that a reporting threshold was met. We encourage you to identify which threshold was met in the event description. This makes it easier for the validations analysts review, may result in fewer questions put to the reporter, and is important information for historical data. Transit worker assaults, there are two terms used to collect the assault type, physical or non-physical. In a physical assault, the assailant makes physical contact with the worker by any means. This may be person to person, or contact may be made with an object, weapon, or other projectile. Projectiles may include bullets, liquids, saliva, or any other substance that makes contact with the worker. In non-physical assaults, there is no physical contact with the worker. Non-physical assaults could be verbal threats, harassment, or interference with the worker's duty that meet a threshold. The most common threshold for assaults on workers is also injury. If there is no injury in an assault on a worker, and in the absence of any other threshold, then the event is reported in the assault section of the non-major SNS 50 form, which we will discuss later. Here are two real examples from the system, but we have removed any agency-specific details, and in some cases, information was removed to shorten the content of the slides. The first example is a non-physical assault on a train conductor. This is reportable as a major event as the conductor is transported for medical attention, in this case, trauma. The second scenario is a fairly common physical assault. Two police officers are assaulted during an arrest. Officers are transported for medical attention. Report an assault on a transit worker. Indicate it was a physical assault and include 2 injuries. Attempted suicide. As you see, the definition includes self-inflicted harm where death does not occur. Please be sure to include an explanation of the intent in the event description to include any police report confirmation and/or eyewitness accounts to confirm the attempted suicide. The most common threshold for an attempted suicide is injury or serious injury. If a person passes on within 30 days of the date of the event, the form may be updated to suicide by checking the suicide checkbox and removing the injury and adding a fatality. As a reminder, any attempted suicide reported on the personal security form are those that do not involve contact with a transit vehicle. For example, if someone attempts suicide by contact with a moving transit vehicle and makes contact with the transit vehicle, the event is reported as a collision and the reporter checks the attempted suicide checkbox on the injury form. Homicide. A homicide is the killing of one human being by another, including murder, non-negligent manslaughter, and negligent manslaughter. A homicide may be the result of an assault, but the event results in a fatality. As we have mentioned before, if, for example, a person is deliberately pushed or shoved and makes contact with a moving transit vehicle, resulting in a fatality, the event is reported as a collision and the reporter checks the homicide checkbox on the fatality form. An event may also need to be changed from an assault to a homicide if the person attacked dies within 30 days of the date of the event. The reporter would open the report and modify the event description to include updated information about the fatality. Change the type from assault to homicide, delete the injury, and add a fatality. In the real event example of an active shooter, the reporter would report the homicide and include both the fatality and injury. The definition of larceny or theft is the taking, carrying, leading, or riding away of property from the possession of another person. NTD does not collect attempted larceny. Larceny and theft includes, but could include stealing services or identities, for example. It's important to note the difference between larceny and robbery as we look at this description. Robbery requires the taking of possessions under confrontational circumstances, where larceny or theft do not. The most common threshold for larceny or theft would be a property damage threshold. Substantial damage would be less common, as the loss of the item or items would have to affect service. In our 2 examples, the stolen catalytic converters met the $25,000 threshold. The stolen ground wires causing delays in service also met the substantial damage threshold. Motor vehicle theft is the act or attempted act of stealing a vehicle. This may be a private vehicle from a transit parking lot or a transit vehicle. The most common threshold for motor vehicle theft would be the property damage or the substantial damage threshold based on mode. Again, this would be less likely to meet substantial damage threshold as it would have to affect service. Here are 2 NTD real examples. The first of a private vehicle stolen from a transit parking lot, and the second for a transit police vehicle that was stolen from an officer. Rape is the forced carnal knowledge of a person against their will. The most common threshold is injury or serious injury. In the event description, if possible, please include any eyewitness accounts or CCTV recorded information or other reports to attest to the event. Here are two examples from reported robberies, one where the employee was robbed and the other of a patron robbery, during which the patron was injured. Suicide is an attempted suicide that resulted in a fatal outcome. Just as with attempted suicide, the event description should confirm the suicide. This may be by police report, eyewitness accounts, CCTV, coroner reports, or other means. As a reminder, suicides reported on the personal security form are those that do not involve contact with a transit vehicle. Any suicide by contact with a moving transit vehicle is reported as a collision, and there are two places where you indicate the event was a suicide. The obvious threshold in this event type is the fatality. The final category is other personal security events, to collect miscellaneous security events that affect people but do not fit into the existing categories. The most likely threshold would be injury or serious injury. One of the most common types of situations for this category is an officer tasing a person, as is depicted in the example. The selection provides a please describe box to describe what occurred and to support the event description, but this should be short, such as officer tasing. I will now hand this over to Grace to cover reporting major system security events.
Thank you very much, James. One moment, let me get to the correct screen. There we go. Thank you very much. Now we're going to review the system security event. System security events are those that affect all or parts of the transit system, not just individuals. These are listed in alphabetical order. So today we're going to start with arson. The definition of arson identifies intentional damage to property by fire or incendiary device. The most common threshold met would be property damage amount or substantial damage depending on mode. However, the event could meet multiple thresholds, such as an injury or evacuation, just to name a few. Here is an example from the NTD system of a person that started a fire on a bus by squirting an accelerant on the floor and seats. This event met both the evacuation threshold by evacuating the vehicle and the property damage threshold. Furthermore, I'd like to point out that this is an excellent description identifying the who, what, why, and where factors, and confirming both the damage amount and that there were no reportable injuries. Bomb threat. A bomb threat is a written or oral communication to the agency threatening the use of an explosive or incendiary device for the purpose of disrupting public transit services or creating a public emergency. The most common threshold is evacuation for life safety. However, there could be related injuries associated with this event type. Here are two examples from past NTD reports. The first of a bus evacuation due to a passenger yelling that there is a bomb on the bus. The second event describes an evacuation of a station due to multiple bomb threats. Remember, the evacuation criteria states an evacuation of a transit facility or a vehicle for life safety or potential life safety reasons. So both of these events are reportable even though no actual bomb was deployed. So the next category is an actual bombing. Bombings include two main criteria. Shown here, the first is the unlawful and intentional delivery, placement, discharge, or detonation of an explosive or other device. The bombing would be, again, to any transit property, including transit vehicles. And secondly, there was a conspiracy, instigation, or attempts to commit these acts with the intent of death, serious injury, damage, or destruction of the location where such destruction is likely to result in major economic loss. Most common thresholds would be injury and/or serious injury and/or dollar amount meeting the $25,000 threshold or meeting the substantial damage threshold, again, depending on mode. According to past reporting, bombing events are very rare. Only one has been reported before in recent history. In this case, an actor detonated an IED in a transit station. Burglary is the unlawful entry into a building or other structure with the intent to commit a felony or theft. Most common threshold would be that the dollar amount meets the threshold or the substantial damage threshold. Here we see an example of copper wire stolen, which accounts for many of the reported burglaries on the NTD. Just a note, substantial damage threshold did not go into effect until 2017. Please note that these would not be reported under larceny/theft on the personal security form. As a reminder, larceny/theft is stealing personal property from a person, where burglary is a system security event stealing transit property and involving unlawful entry. Cybersecurity. As we all know, cybersecurity events appear to be on the rise in general. One could expect that transit agencies could become more of a target than in the past. In the NTD, a cybersecurity event is one that targets the agency's transit facilities, personnel, information, or computer or telecommunication systems. These events may result in denial or disruption of computer or telecommunication services, unauthorized monitoring of computer or telecommunication systems, unauthorized disclosure of proprietary or classified information, unauthorized modification of destruction of computer programming codes, computer network databases, or the manipulation of computer or telecommunication services resulting from fraud, financial loss, or other criminal violations. Some transit report multiple modal systems. Cybersecurity events are, by definition, system security events that affect the entire transit system. Therefore, for agencies that provide both rail and non-rail services, the attack likely impacts both modes. In this case, under what mode should the agency report the cyber event? The agency should use the following approach, which is known as the predominant use rule. Volume of passengers served by a mode most often measures predominant use. However, an agency may choose to use the number of vehicles in service. So, for example, if an agency operates both heavy rail and light rail modes, most likely the heavy rail is a higher volume of service, so the event would be reported under heavy rail. The predominant use rule is not exclusive to cyber events, so you can use this rule for other reporting. This may also be a factor in bombings, for example. If the agency does not provide any rail service but operates only non-rail services, the event should be reported under the non-rail mode with the highest ridership or the highest number or vehicles. Again, either measure may be used. So, for example, if the agency operates both fixed route bus services and bus rapid transit, most likely the agency would report this under the fixed route bus service. The most common threshold for cyber events would be a dollar amount meeting the threshold or substantial damage threshold. Please note that if an employee institutes a cyber attack, it is instead to be reported as sabotage. So, we just mentioned that the most common threshold for cyber attacks is property damage or substantial damage, again, based upon the mode. So let's look at applying substantial damage to cyber events. The definition of substantial damage criteria is applied to all events, including cyber events. Here's a reminder of the definition of substantial damage. While towing is not likely to be a factor in cyber attacks, we left the criteria intact. Again, a dollar value is not a factor in the substantial damage threshold. The FTA website also has a page on cybersecurity awareness and prevention if you want any more information. Here are two cyber events reported to the NTD. The first is a bus mode, and the damage was in excess of $25,000. The second event was on a rail mode system. Unfortunately, this event description does not include how it affected service, which it absolutely should, but substantial damage threshold was confirmed during validation. So you can see the importance of including this information for historical data review. The next event is a CBR event. A CBR event is the unlawful and intentional placement, discharge, or detonation of a biological, chemical, or radiological/other lethal device against transit property. CBR events are often thought of as a terrorist attack or a large-scale event. However, they need not be thought of as only large-scale events. A CBR event may involve solids, liquids, or gases that have chemical properties that can result in lethal or serious effects on people. Less common in the transit world thus far are the release of disease organisms. The intent of CBR events is to cause death or serious bodily harm, or with the intent to cause extensive damage or destruction of a place, facility, or transit system. Pepper spray is included, as people may be allergic to the pepper, and it may result in a serious situation, including anaphylactic shock. The most common threshold is an evacuation for life safety, but another threshold could be an injury. Here you see two examples of an unknown substance being released on a station causing an evacuation, and the second where mace was sprayed in a train car and that the operator required medical transport. This is a good place to mention that, unlike these events, if a person is sprayed with the unknown substance or mace, then the event is instead to be reported as an assault event. The next event to discuss is hijacking. You may see a complete definition here, but in summary, a hijacking is the overtaking of the transit vehicle from the operator with the intent to cause any person on board the vehicle to be detained against their will, or transporting the operator and any passengers to a location other than the next stop, or causing the vehicle to deviate from its schedule. The most common thresholds would be a dollar amount meeting the threshold or meeting substantial damage thresholds. Here's an example of a hijacking in the system where a person, upset that he was cited for fare evasion, assaults the operator who got off the vehicle, and then the hijacker drove away with the bus. Sabotage. Sabotage is the deliberate destruction of transit property or the slowing down of public transit operations by employees with the intention of damaging business or the economic condition of the transit agency. Remember that when we discuss cyber attacks, if an employee institutes a cyber attack, it is to be reported as a sabotage event. The most common thresholds would be dollar amount meeting the threshold or meeting the substantial damage threshold. Currently, there have been no reports of sabotage in the NTD system. Suspicious packages. A suspicious package event involves an unattended package deemed suspicious by the transit agency, which results in an evacuation. However, other thresholds, such as injury, may be involved. Remember, the evacuation criteria states an evacuation of a transit facility or vehicle is for life safety or potential life safety reasons, as was mentioned earlier in the presentation. Suspicious packages are a fairly common event in the NTD. Here's an example of an NTD event where a bag on a bus with wires and another object were hanging out of it. As there was a potential threat, the bus was evacuated. Ultimately, it was determined that there was no danger. Vandalism is the willful or malicious destruction or defacement of transit property or vehicles. As you can see, this would include slashed tires, broken windows, damage to fare collection systems, and so on. The most common thresholds would be dollar amount, meeting the threshold or meeting the substantial damage threshold. Here are two examples of vandalism. In the first event, the grade crossing control devices were vandalized, resulting in significant delays. And in the second, an irate passenger shattered the glass door. Final category is other system security events, which is used to collect miscellaneous security events that affect the transit system but do not fit into existing categories. The most common threshold are evacuations and/or injuries. This selection provides a please describe box to describe what happened, and this should be short and direct, unlike your event description. Here are a couple of reported other system security events. In the first report, shots were fired in the station and no one was injured, but the station was evacuated. In the second event, there were random shots fired on the street and a person on the bus was injured. So now we have gone through all of the event types. Now we would like to present our top 5 most frequently asked questions and their answers. The first question pertains to an employee who is assaulted while off duty, but is on transit property. Some agencies consider a worker as on duty during a break, while others may not. So, if a worker is assaulted on a break, is it reportable if the worker is still performing their duties at the time? Remember, the definition of an assault on a transit worker includes that the worker is performing the duties of a transit worker. Please be sure to include this type of detail in your event descriptions. Here are 2 examples. The first pertains to a driver on duty, though not driving at the time of the assault. However, the layover is a part of the service route and the operator is on transit property, and therefore it is reported as an assault on a transit worker, either as a major or non-major event based on if the worker was injured at the time. In the second example, the operator is off duty and not performing work duties while waiting to ride a bus home when assaulted and injured. This is reported as an assault, but it is not an assault on a transit worker because the worker was not performing their duties at the time of the event. The next question asks about how to report multiple events occurring at the same time. However, in the NTD, there are no subcategories, so one must choose between events, such as a robbery or assault. For example, robberies are inherently include an assault event, as robberies are performed by force. Historically and currently, events that happen at the same time should be reported under the best classification. This is left to the discretion of the transit agency, but this is currently under discussion by the FTA, so we may have updates for you on that. Question 3 is one most bus service providers will be familiar with. An irate passenger is kicking or hitting the vehicle while yelling at the operator. Should this be considered a physical or non-physical assault? This would be considered a non-physical assault unless the operator is injured by the flying/broken glass. On many occasions, we have been asked if phone call threats to dispatch centers, customer service centers, or other type of areas are reportable. The answer is no. Events in administrative buildings are not reportable unless they somehow involve a transit vehicle. Our last question pertains to a bus passenger who sprayed pepper spray on the bus and the bus was evacuated. I wish we had a polling question right now, as we recently covered this. I'll give you time to try to answer it yourself. Okay, this would be reported as a CBR event. People can be allergic to pepper spray, and it can result in adverse reaction. As a reminder, if the pepper spray is targeted at a passenger or specific person, it would be reported as an assault. Or if a worker was sprayed, it would fall under an assault on a transit worker. I will now turn the rest of the presentation back over to Anne again.
Thank you, Grace. Excuse me. So let's take a look at reporting non-major assault on transit workers that we've been mentioning throughout the presentation. Excuse me, the definition of a reportable non-major assault on a worker is the same as it is for major events. So an assault must occur on the transit right-of-way or infrastructure, at a transit revenue facility, at a maintenance facility, or during a transit-related maintenance activity, or involving a transit revenue vehicle. While the SMS 50 form for most agencies also includes non-major safety events and non-major fires, we will only discuss non-major assault on transit workers in this session. This form collects worker assault where the worker was not injured, which by FTA's definition, as you've heard us say, means that the worker was not transported away for medical attention or had a serious injury. Assaults with injuries are reported as a major event. The same exclusions we discussed for major reporting also apply here for non-major reporting. Therefore, events occurring at bus stops or shelters that are not on transit-owned property are not reportable unless it involves a person boarding or alighting at the time of the event, or involves the transit revenue vehicle. It's important to note also that the definition of an assault on a transit worker and the definition of transit worker are the same as we discussed in major event reporting. They are included here just as a reminder. Again, we'd like to point out that the worker need not be a paid employee. He or she may be I'm going to sneeze, may be a volunteer working on behalf of the transit agency. Again, the thresholds for applying to determine a reportable event are included in the definition. Again, indicated here in bold, they are intent to endanger the safety of any individual or with reckless disregard for the safety of human life. Again, the onus is on the transit agency to determine if the threshold is met. We have several resources available that you'll see shortly that also may be of help in determining reportability. The S&S 50's collection on non-major assaults on transit workers is a monthly summary of aggregate data by mode and type of service. Excuse me. Please do not use this form to report all assaults, meaning do not combine your major assaults and your non-major assaults together on this form. You'll report the location of the assault and the type of worker that was assaulted. As you can see, there are two types of workers: operators, whose job it is to operate the transit vehicles, and other transit workers, which could include train cleaners, security personnel, and volunteers. As with major assaults on transit workers, the non-major assaults are to be classified as physical or non-physical. In a physical assault, the assailant makes physical contact with the worker. This may be their body, by an object, weapon, or projectile. Projectiles may include bullets, liquids, assailant's saliva, or any other substance or object directed at the worker. In non-physical assaults, there's no physical contact with the worker. Non-physical assaults could be verbal threats, harassment, or interference with the worker's duties. For example, interference with the operator's ability to continue service by threatening the operator and refusing to exit a vehicle when asked. The form includes an additional details box. While you're not required to enter any information in this box, it was partially intended to collect information regarding risk factors, specific routes or troublesome routes, anti-assault infrastructure that's in place, any surveillance equipment that may be on board, and so on. If you do choose to include information about the assault or assaults, please use it to identify thresholds, confirm that the assault was physical or non-physical, and the location, for example. In other words, the content should corroborate your data selections if you are going to include content. This is especially important regarding the number of assaults. If you report that there's 5 assaults and only describe one, the validation analysts will return this report for clarification as to whether 1 or 5 occurred. There are a couple of examples here of reportable events, one physical and one non-physical. In the first, a passenger on a bus refuses to pay the fare and spits on the operator. The operator denies transport. You would report a physical assault on an operator. In the second event, a train cleaner accidentally brushed the passenger's foot, and the passenger threatens the cleaner with bodily harm. Report the non-physical assault on another transit worker. Excuse me. Here are a couple of examples of events that would not be reportable to NTD. First, in the first example, a transit worker is shouted at over the phone. This is not reportable in that it occurred in an administrative building, and things in administrative buildings are not reportable unless the event somehow involved a transit revenue vehicle. Secondly, a patron calls a bus operator an offensive name as they get off the bus. The operator is not traumatized by the event and continues service. This is not reportable as it does not meet the thresholds. In this case, there was no intent to endanger the operator. Okay, so complete and submit one form for each mode and type of service monthly. If no qualifying security event occurred for the month and mode, open the appropriate SNS 50 form and choose the checkbox no non-major assaults to report. The SNS 50 is completed regardless of the existence of any major event in the same month or at any time. As a reminder, the NTD system sends automated late notices on the 1st, 5th, and 15th of each month if the SNS 50 has not been submitted. If a report has only been saved and there is no submit date, it's considered late. At 3 months, the late agency is reported to FTA headquarters as delinquent. Right, so that includes all of our events, major and non-major. Now I'll just point out a couple of resources. And the first, I believe, is the most important. There's a current Federal Register notice called Proposed Reporting Changes and Clarifications for Report Years 25 and 26. This notice includes proposed changes to cybersecurity event reporting and a disabling damage threshold and a few other options. This is your opportunity to weigh in on the proposed safety and security reporting changes. So please review, use the link there to go to the FRN and review and make your comments or concerns in the posts. The reporting period, or the comment period rather, does end at the end of December. There are several resources available for further information on assault on transit workers, including additional frequently asked questions and the 2024 Safety and Security Policy Manual and other guidance. Here are some other resources. One for Public Transportation Agency Safety Action Plan, frequently asked questions. Agencies often ask questions regarding developing the safety action plans and how NTD data may be used in risk assessments, for example. So this is a great page that can help answer all of your questions with regard to safety action plans. There's additional information presentation by TSO, which covers an assault on a transit workers, initiatives, and how NTD data collection ties into tracking progress towards the risk reduction program. Also, there's information on assault awareness and prevention from the National Transit Institute. Okay, so that concludes our webinar. And again, as we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, here is our contact information. If you do not know who your safety analyst is, please feel free to contact any of us, or if you just prefer to ask your questions, in one-on-one sessions, again, please feel free to contact any of us. Now I see that there's some questions still coming in on the Q&A box. So we'll just go ahead and answer these verbally rather than type it out. Let's see, is it considered reportable assault within a rail system if a passenger verbally speaks expletives at another passenger or a worker? Okay, it can. It's if there is the intent to endanger. If this person is really being violent and confrontational and maybe getting in the person's face and really truly threatening, which can be considered an intent to endanger that person, then it could be reportable. Now, that is talking about workers. If we're talking about passengers, if they're just verbally abusing or expletives at a passenger, that would probably not be reportable, just in summary. I mean, usually those people are not reported. We do collect operator trauma, but typically not passengers. We really have to kind of take that on a case-by-case basis, I would say. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I was going to ask.
And there was one question, and I mentioned that we may have to discuss this in more length, but you may have an answer. It was about a laser pointer being shined in an operator's eye if that would be physical or non-physical.
Okay. Well, it's making contact with the operator, so I would say that would be physical. Unless it's like just in front of their eyes, it's not actually like being shown in their eye, which I guess they'd have to be in front of them if that were the case. So I guess it kind of depends on where they are, but it sounds to me like if it's really being pointed at the operator's eyes, it's making contact, so to speak, with their eyes, then that would be a physical assault. Does that answer it more clearly?
Yep.
That's a tough one.
Yeah, that isn't unusual. I haven't had that question before, so.
I mean, it happens, right?
Well, I should think that it does. I have read situations where that's occurred. I'm thinking in my mind, I'm kind of overthinking as a validation analyst, how did that get shown in the operator's eyes? But I guess somebody could be in a car in front of the vehicle when the person's driving, or maybe they're in the vehicle at a bus stop or something, and the person turns around and shines it in their eyes, something like that.
And Jake put in the chat that it could be in the bus mirror.
Ah,
Yeah,
okay.
that would be terrible.
Yeah, that would be. Is it physical or is it not? That's a good question.
I mean, it's disrupting
Well,
their
I'm not saying it's not
physical.
reportable. I'm just trying to determine whether it's physical or not
Right,
physical.
right. I know that's,
So,
I mean,
it's physically affecting them.
right.
Let me put it that way, because they can't see. So I think that's probably the way we would go with that. And that's a good question to bring up for confirmation. I don't think I've had one of those since we've been doing assaults on transit workers. So, different connection and whether it's major or non-major and so forth. So I'm leaning towards the physical, and we'll probably, double check that and, make it an example perhaps in the 2025 reporting manual, which should be out in January, by the way.
Oh, it's great. Are there any more questions? We do have time. This is in the chat. It says, oh, we're still talking about the laser pointer. Yes, Penny, that is disturbing on several levels.
Yeah, it could be damaging their eyes. I see what you're choosing there. Don't know if it's a laser pointer or a gun. Oh, that's true too.
Yeah, I mean, right? Guns they have lasers on them.
Yes,
Some
they
of them.
do. Some of them do. Yes.
Scary stuff.
And we all know that there are crazy people out there doing these things.
There are lots of crazy people out there.
Lots of crazy people out there, right?
Um,
All right. Well, if anybody does have any other questions, again, here's our contact information. Please feel free to reach out to any of us, and I'll be more than glad to answer your questions.
oh, and in the chat, it actually asks about spitting, and then now there's another question about verbal assault. So let's.
Okay.
Is
Let me
spitting
look over that.
is spitting considered a verbal assault?
Well, no, spitting can be considered, well, it's not verbal. Well,
I mean,
guess
not verbal,
you're using
physical.
their
Did I say
mouth, but
verbal?
yeah, sorry. It's okay. Spitting can go two ways, and this is very, where we have to get kind of nitpicky sometimes with the way somebody writes it out. So somebody tells us that they spit at the operator. That doesn't tell me anything. Doesn't tell me whether they made contact with them or not. So the important criteria is when they were spit on, and again, unfortunately, we know this happens all the time. If the spit makes contact with the person, then it's physical assault. If the spit does not make contact, they missed and it went by them and it didn't make contact with the operator, then it's non-physical. It's still an assault regardless, but because spitting, people can be sick, they can have diseases that are communicable by that spit, so on, saliva. So it is still an assault. It's just whether it actually makes contact or doesn't make contact. And so again, be careful with using spit at or spit on, because they're not the same thing when we're validating. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, there's a new question about, that's why I said verbal because I was reading it as I was speaking. So
Okay.
just
A
to
verbal
defend myself.
assault using obscene language, one operator shrugs it off, as we mentioned, we had that example, and another has a stress, parks the bus and is relieved. Right. So that's the deciding factor there on that assault. So if the operator is traumatized by this slur, whatever happened there, the offensive language, whatever it may be, and they're traumatized and transported, obviously this is interfering with the operator's duty to perform their duty because now they have to get a relief operator, it's delaying service, it's doing all kinds of things. So in that case, that's going to get reported as a major event because the operator was transported. If the operator shrugs it off and continues, as we used in our example, then it's not reportable because they weren't traumatized by the event. They weren't affected by it. I mean, I can see where some are like that because, again, we know that this happens literally daily, multiple times a day for many agencies.
Yuck.
Okay. Yeah, really. Yeah. To me, that's like one of the worst things you can do to something, except some of the other ones I've read, which I won't go into.
Yeah, don't give people ideas. Just kidding. Any more questions? As Ann said, everyone's emails are up on the screen and should appear on the last page of your handout, so you'll have them. As soon as this is over, I will see what's on my plate and work on editing and getting this posted on the YouTube page. And also, while I'm chatting, I will be sending out an email asking for you to complete a quick eval about the session. Please do so. It really helps us out, and your feedback lets us know how we're doing. So, oh,
And everybody, sorry, go ahead.
sorry, one more question came in.
I was also going to say, please don't forget that Federal Register notice. If you have any concerns about reporting security events, cyber events, disabling damage, what these mean, you'll want to look at that Federal Register. And also you may report on other aspects of NTD. And there's other, the annual reporting, ridership, so on and so forth. There's other things in that FRN as well. So that is your opportunity to go in and say, no, I don't like this, or yes, this is a great idea, or whatever comment you may have. So if the verbal assault disrupts service, it's reportable, but if it doesn't, then it's not reportable. Again, sometimes we have to read the event and see what we're talking about. So if disrupting service is one portion of it. Is it intent to endanger or reckless disregard for safety? That's the threshold. And, again, if you have a specific situation that you have in mind or something that's occurred in your transit agency, please feel free to contact one of us so that we can talk more explicitly about that event.
Great. Thanks.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much. And I hope you enjoyed the webinar. And I believe, Lori, she may have already said it, that you have a...
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
The evaluation is coming. And I think this was our last webinar that we have currently scheduled. Oh, sorry, my computer's banging at me. So I guess stay tuned for the next round, which I believe will be coming. I don't know if we're having any in December. We haven't scheduled them yet, but
No, we don't have anything for December. We don't,
January.
at least not on my side, not on
Okay.
safety side. We will have something in the spring-ish timeframe. We're still determining whether that's going to be a webinar or a course.
Oh, okay. So maybe we have a new course for you. So you can join our mailing list. Maybe I'll put that in the survey in case anybody's not on the mailing list. And
there's a question about
oh,
do you get a certificate?
Oh, that's from Don.
But
So this is a webinar and it's purely informational and we don't take attendance and we don't really give out certificates or anything because it's just sort of a free informational session that literally 1,000 people could be on. So if you need proof that you attended or something, I can go into the Zoom files and find that. I don't know how strict people's jobs are, but yeah, I can help you out if you need to prove that you attended or something, but we don't, there's no credit per se. That made sense. But I guess that's it. Thanks everyone. Thank you for a great presentation. And James and Grace, it's always great working with you, and I will see everyone next time.
All
Thanks.
right. Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.